The conference room door clicked shut behind me, and Chen Li didn't bother lifting his gaze from his tablet for the first full minute I sat down. HR Director Li slid the termination paperwork across the table without preamble, the bold black print of termination of employment, burning into my line of sight before I read a single clause. Chen's voice carried a dismissive sneer, no attempt to mask his disdain for my 15 years of foundational work. Nova needs fresh, agile talent. Your working style doesn't align with our future growth trajectory anymore. Li cut in immediately to recite the severance package numbers flat, like reading a grocery receipt. N+1 compensation plus special long service bonus totals 88 million yuan, fully dispersed this afternoon. I didn't react to the seven-figure sum. My eyes locked on Chen as he spoke directly to HR, completely ignoring my presence. We can't keep carrying old-timers who just clock hours without driving new metrics. Clearing dead weight early saves the company long-term overhead. Dead weight. The phrase looped in my head as my fingers tightened around the pen. I'd coded Nova's first raw data framework from scratch when the office fit only 6 folding desks. I pulled all-nighters for 2 straight months to build the Star AI project's core algorithm when Chen demanded an impossible launch timeline for investor roadshows. I'd covered his repeated rushed planning mistakes dozens of times to prevent public project failures, never once demanding public credit or extra pay raises. Every late night, every crippling migraine from screen strain, every holiday I skipped vanished into thin air behind that single derogatory label. I signed my name hard enough to leave indentations cutting through the paper sheets, stood without a single word of rebuttal, and walked out before either of them could add more patronizing commentary. Back at my desk, the entire open office fell silent the second I rounded the partition wall. Every co-worker's eyes darted away the second I met their stares. Some hid smirks behind monitor frames. Others stared at their keyboards in manufactured busyness. None dared meet my gaze or offer a word of comfort. I recognized every face. I'd personally trained half of the junior team sitting within 10 feet of my station, stayed late to resolve their coding bugs countless times, taken the blame for their careless data entry errors during quarterly audits. Now they were all silently relieved the axe hadn't fallen on them. I packed my small personal items into a cardboard box without touching the shared company server folders on my desktop. I followed policy to upload basic Surface project archives to the shared cloud drive, but every proprietary debug log, custom data validation trigger, and unrecorded core algorithm flow stayed locked inside my personal encrypted USB drive. Materials I drafted during off hours as independent reference drafts, never classified as official company deliverables during 3 years of iterative development. Chen had always refused to approve formal cross-team training schedules, dismissing knowledge transfer sessions as a waste of working hours, so no other employee possessed full visibility into the Star project's tangled back-end architecture. He'd spent years engineering a system that only one person could fully maintain, and that person was me. As I carried the box out the building front doors, my work phone buzzed nonstop with group chat notifications from the company's main staff channel. I clicked open the thread without hesitation, scanning line after unfiltered mockery posted by people I collaborated with for over a decade. 1.88 million severance. She can retire easy now, no loss for her. Always looked like a worn-out old lady glued to her monitor, never contributed flashy new projects anyway. Chen Li's so generous cutting her such a big check for dead weight staff. I locked the screen without replying, walked home in complete silence, and sat alone in my empty apartment for hours scrolling, every contact tied to Novatech. Chen Li, HR Li, every teammate from the group chat, every manager who'd stood by and watched Chen belittle senior staff without pushback, 220 names total, all blocked one after another with zero hesitation. Each block was a quiet marker for 15 years of unappreciated labor tossed aside for a young CEO's ego. My private phone buzzed hours later with an unknown number text from Zhang Yuan, my most promising junior mentee. He sent a screenshot of the internal engineering leadership group chat, Chen's message front and center. Losing Lin Wan changes nothing. The team's fully capable, without some obsolete old employee dragging us down. A string of sycophantic replies followed, all of them engineers I'd personally coached through critical system fixes. I typed a one-word reply back to Zhang, noted, then powered off my personal phone entirely to process every choice Chen had forced onto me, MY1. 88 million severance wasn't a retirement gift. It was advance payment for the collapse he created by erasing the only person holding his flagship Star AI project together. Every automated data lock trigger I'd embedded as safety protocols would activate on a timed 3-day cycle without my monthly manual reset, and he had 0 team members qualified to override the security locks. I didn't intend to sabotage maliciously. I only planned to stand back and let him face the direct consequences of his own dismissive decision to discard the company's foundational engineer. I pulled out my encrypted USB and laid it flat on the coffee table, running a finger over the plastic casing. Every hidden debug record inside contained the exact override steps required to stabilize Star Project's backend. If Chen swallowed his pride and reached out to negotiate honestly, I'd hand over the documentation in exchange for formal public acknowledgement of my work and a genuine apology. But if he doubled down on his arrogant belief that my expertise was replaceable, the entire company's core revenue-generating AI platform would fully crash in exactly 72 hours. I opened a commercial real estate listing site on my laptop and began drafting a business plan for my independent data tech startup, already mapping out competing AI solution frameworks to launch once Nova unraveled under Chen's mismanagement. The game he'd started by writing me off as dead weight was only just beginning. I powered off my phone completely after replying to Zhang's short message, slipping it into a drawer where I wouldn't be tempted to check any incoming updates or pleas. For 15 years, every single morning had been dictated by Novatech's schedule, 7:45 a.m. clock-in, back-to-back code reviews, endless after-hours fire drills to patch Chen Li's reckless project deadlines. Now, for the first time in over a decade, I had 0 mandatory responsibilities hanging over my head. My only timeline was the 72-hour automated lock sequence I'd built into Star Project's data verification core, a safety measure I'd coded 3 years prior after the massive company-wide data breach. Back then, I designed it to stop catastrophic leaks if maintenance fell through. I never imagined it would end up becoming the perfect consequence for Chen's reckless choice to discard the only engineer who understood the entire system. Day one of the countdown, I drove out to a hot spring resort on the city's outskirts, tossed my work sim card into the hotel safe, and flipped my personal device to airplane mode. I didn't check a single work-related message, didn't waste a single second replaying the humiliating termination meeting or the cruel group chat comments. The hot water melted the chronic shoulder, and I strain I'd carried from years hunched over monitors, and for hours, my mind stayed clear of Nova's chaos. Deep down, I knew exactly what was unfolding back at the office, but I refused to inject myself into their self-created mess. Chun had spent years publicly bragging that the company could operate without any single individual, and now he'd get to test that theory firsthand. No interference from me. His motivation for brushing off risk was straightforward. Ego. All his social media, investor calls, and internal speeches revolved around framing himself as a self-made prodigy who'd built Star Project single-handedly. Admitting the entire platform relied on a 45-year-old senior engineer would shatter the polished public persona he'd spent years curating. Even if minor technical glitches popped up early on, he'd force his team to push through without reaching out to me, terrified admitting he needed my help would make him look weak in front of staff and investors alike. Day 2, I left the resort early and headed straight to a high-end downtown mall. I'd never allowed myself splurges while employed at Nova. Every spare dollar went toward covering household bills and my daughter's school costs, and I'd always prioritized overtime work over personal shopping trips. I picked out 3 tailored professional dresses, neutral polished blazers, and structured trousers that fit perfectly, stepping in front of the fitting room mirror and barely recognizing the woman staring back. For over a decade, I'd hidden behind oversized faded office hoodies, prioritizing comfort over appearance to avoid drawing Chen's subtle age-based jabs. Now there was no need to shrink myself to make the young CEO feel superior. By mid-afternoon, I turned airplane mode off for 10 minutes to skim unread texts from Zhang Yuan alone, filtering out every unknown number and unfamiliar contact. His messages rolled in one after another, time-stamped every hour from Nova's crisis room. 2 p.m. The monthly report data pipeline locked up entirely, all sales dashboards spitting garbled, unreadable values. The junior dev spent 2 hours digging through shared cloud archives and can't locate the validation key I used to reset the triggers. 2:45 p.m. Chun stormed the engineering floor screaming, calling the whole team incompetent for failing a trivial back-end fix. We're all stuck pulling mandatory overnight shifts to hunt for root causes. No one has a clue where to start troubleshooting. 3:10 p.m. We tried rolling back old code branches. Every rollback triggers a new chain of system errors instead of fixing the reports. I sipped a latte at a nearby cafe while reading, my expression entirely neutral. These weren't random bugs. They were the first tier of timed safeguards activating, small warning signs I'd built into the architecture to alert engineers of unmaintained core infrastructure. A competent, collaborative leadership team would have flagged the pattern and tracked down the sole engineer with full knowledge of the system within hours. But Chen's management style had stripped the team of any independent critical thinking. Every junior dev had only ever been given sliced-off fragments of the project to handle. Full end-to-end oversight had been locked to my access and mental knowledge alone. Zhang's panic was understandable, but his choice to stay silent during the group chat harassment a few days prior didn't slip my mind. He'd watched his colleagues mock me as an obsolete old lady and said nothing, too scared of Chen's retaliation to defend the woman who taught him everything he knew. I felt sympathy for his trapped position, but I wouldn't step in to rescue the team before Chen faced the full weight of his own decisions. I sent a 2-word reply, I see, then shut the phone back down and focused on drafting outlines for my upcoming independent tech firm service catalog. Every line I typed was a blueprint for the business I'd launch once Nova's collapse forced the market to acknowledge how irreplaceable my expertise truly was. By the 3rd day, I'd finished my morning yoga routine at home, sunlight filtering through my apartment windows as my phone exploded with nonstop breaking news push notifications. The top headline dominated every tech media outlet. Star AI project full outage. Official platforms, client portals completely unavailable. Attached to the headline was a photo of Nova Tech's glass office tower. Every digital banner on the building's exterior flashing permanent. System maintenance. Error text. This was the 2nd tier of my time triggers activating. The full core database lock. The final warning before permanent structural corruption would begin eating client stored data. Zhang's next text was laced with unfiltered terror. Lin Jie, it's catastrophic. Every core module crashed simultaneously. We can't log into the primary backend server at all. Chen's phone hasn't stopped ringing with furious investors and major enterprise clients demanding immediate explanations. He's mobilizing every HR rep and admin to hunt down your personal phone number, private address, any way to get in contact with you. They're tearing through old employee files to track you down. I set the phone aside and pulled my encrypted USB drive out of my desk drawer, twisting it between my fingers. The drive held the complete override sequence, step-by-step debug walkthroughs, and full documentation for every locked data layer. If I handed this over now, Chen would brush off the entire disaster as a minor temporary glitch, issue a quick public apology, and go right back to dismissing my contributions in front of investors and staff. He'd learned 0 lessons about respecting senior technical talent, and the same cycle of exploitation would repeat with the next veteran engineer he deemed too old to fit his company's flashy image. His desperation was already bleeding through every channel he could weaponize to reach me. Over the next several hours, a string of familiar people I'd cut off began reaching out via indirect routes. My distant cousin, my former university professor, even my daughter's elementary school teacher, all contacted by Chun under the guise of offering a lucrative, high-paying contract to lure me back to Nova. Each intermediary parroted the same script he'd fed them. A senior tech role with massive salary raises waiting if I'd just make contact and resolve the system failure. Every outreach attempt was transparent, a transparent manipulation tactic to corner me without offering a single genuine apology for his ageist layoff speech or the group chat bullying he'd allowed to fester under his roof. I declined every single outreach politely but firmly. No extra details shared. No willingness to engage in backdoor negotiations before Chen faced direct accountability for his actions. I could predict his next move easily. Once casual intermediaries failed to draw me out, he turned to direct intimidation tactics, threatening legal action for alleged sabotage and a last-ditch attempt to pressure me into surrendering the system fix. My lawyer friend had already walked me through every legal angle days prior, reassuring me all the safety triggers I'd coded fell under legitimate preventive maintenance architecture, not malicious sabotage. All official shared deliverables had been fully uploaded to Nova's cloud servers during my final shift. The private debug logs and override guides remained my independent intellectual property, drafted on personal hardware during off hours long before Star Project launched publicly. Late that evening, a new message landed from Zhang, longer than any prior note, heavy with guilt and fear. Chan locked me in his private office for an hour, promised a promotion to lead technical director and a 50% pay bump if I could track you down. If I failed to get through to you, he's sworn to blacklist me across the entire local tech industry, ruin every future job opportunity one could land. I'm stuck between my family's rent bills and the debt of gratitude I owe you for training me. I don't know what to do. I didn't fire off an immediate rescue plan for him. Instead, I sat on my couch and weighed his motives. He'd spent months remaining neutral while I was publicly degraded at the company, only reaching out once the entire business crumbled around him. His loyalty only surfaced when his own career stability hung in the balance. I typed a calm, measured response laying out 2 clear paths for him. Either document every failed troubleshooting attempt the team had logged over the past 3 days as evidence of Chen's mismanagement, or distance himself from Nova's sinking ship and begin submitting resumes to rival tech startups building comparable AI analytics frameworks. I wouldn't rush to save a team that stood by and watched me get discarded without a single word of defense. I glanced out my living room window as dusk fell over the neighborhood, catching sight of a sleek black Maserati rolling to a stop directly outside my apartment building's main gate through the glass. I recognized the vehicle instantly. Chun-Li's signature luxury sports car, the one he'd constantly flaunt in company parking lots to flex his wealthy heir status. He'd exhausted every indirect contact trick and resorted to showing up at my private residence unannounced, desperate to corner me face to face and bully me into fixing his broken project before investor funds dried up entirely. I grabbed my lawyer's business card off the counter, tucking it into my jacket pocket, already mapping out exactly how I'd shut down his incoming attempt at emotional manipulation and empty monetary bribes. The 3-day countdown's final stage was officially here, and Chen had no idea how much worse the fallout would get if he continued refusing to take accountability for his own choices. I didn't rush down to confront him the second I spotted Chen's Maserati parked at the building gate. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the building's real-time security feed via the Resident Access app, watching every move he made from the comfort of my living room. He paced back and forth on the sidewalk, one hand glued to his phone, firing off frantic calls every 30 seconds, jaw tight enough to crack his molars. His custom-tailored designer suit was crumpled at the cuffs, hair matted with sweat, none of the polished, put-together CEO act he paraded for investors and staff. His core motive for showing up uninvited was simple panic, mixed with unshakable arrogance. He still operated under the delusion that money could fix every problem, that a quick cash bribe or inflated job title would make me overlook the dead weight, insult, the public workplace humiliation, and 3 years of uncredited labor buried under Star Project's code. He unprocessed that the damage wasn't technical, it was personal, rooted in years of being undervalued and tossed aside the second he deemed me a financial burden. A text pinged through from my lawyer friend half a minute later. She'd gotten a heads up from a peer at Chen's legal firm. He's already consulted counsel about filing a false breach of contract claim, alleging you sabotaged company infrastructure. Remind him all timed locks are documented safety protocols, not retaliatory hacks. Your off-hours personal debug logs are fully separate intellectual property. I typed a 1-sentence confirmation back, then slipped my keys and lawyer's business card into my crossbody bag before heading for the elevator. When I stepped out of the lift into the ground floor lobby, Chen's head snapped up instantly. He abandoned his phone mid-call, stormed over to block my path, voice raised loud enough for the lobby security guard to glance over from the front desk. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you nonstop for 3 full days. You fix Star Project right now, and I'll triple your old salary, hand you 5% company equity. Whatever number you name, I'll sign it on the spot. I stood my ground, no flinch at his raised volume. That's a nice offer, but you're skipping the single most critical piece of this conversation. You called me dead weight in front of HR during my termination meeting. You let the entire office mock me in group chats without a single word of pushback. You cut me loose like I was disposable trash after 15 years building your company's entire foundation. Money doesn't erase that. Chen's face flushed red with frustration, hands balled into fists at his sides. This is business. Layoffs happen. You can't hold a single offhand comment against me and tank an entire flagship project costing hundreds of millions in investor capital. Offhand, I repeated flat, tilting my head to call out his selective memory. You spent months in all-hands meetings framing senior staff as costly liabilities you needed to cut to hit quarterly budget targets. That wasn't a random slip of the tongue. It was your official leadership stance, broadcast to every department lead. He shifted tactics fast, ditching the bribe angle to lean into emotional manipulation, eyes widening in manufactured distress. Think of all the regular employees stuck in the crossfire. They've got rent, kids' tuition to pay. Your petty grudge is putting their livelihoods on the line. I crossed my arms, seeing straight through the performative concern. Those same coworkers stood by and joked about me being a washed-up old lady the second I got laid off. Not one of them sent a private message checking if I was okay. Not one pushed back on the mockery in the group chat. Where was their worry for mutual respect back then? Chun had no rebuttal for that. His script fell apart, so he pivoted straight to threats, lowering his voice to a sharp, menacing growl. If you refuse to reverse the system locks, I'll file a civil suit for massive revenue damages. We'll drag this through court for months, leak every detail of your employment history to industry recruiters. You'll never land another tech role in the city again. I pulled my lawyer's card out of my bag and held it up between us, letting the printed firm letterhead catch the lobby overhead lights. My attorney's number is printed here. All communication from this point forward goes through her. No unscheduled private confrontations at my residence allowed. For the record, every time validation trigger I built was filed in internal safety documentation 3 years ago after the massive data leak incident. The full public cloud archive I submitted on my last shift contains every official company deliverable I was contractually obligated to hand over. The override walkthroughs are personal drafts I wrote on my own laptop during off hours. They're legally my property, not Novatech assets. The color drained from Chen's face in one instant. He'd walked into this ambush fully convinced he held all the legal leverage, never stopping to consider I'd documented every line dividing company and personal work long before the layoff ever crossed his mind. He'd rushed into intimidation without doing a single fact check, blinded by his desperate need to salvage his investor reputation. Before he could fire off another angry retort, the lobby security guard wandered over, clipboard in hand. Sir, residents have called in complaints about you loitering and shouting outside the building. If you don't vacate the premises immediately, I'll need to contact local patrol officers to escort you off private property. Chun shot a venomous glare at me, then spun on his heel and stormed back to his Maserati, slamming the car door hard enough the entire vehicle shook. I watched him peel out of the parking lot at reckless speed, then pulled out my phone to text Zhang Yuan a quick update, laying out Chen's failed visit and empty legal threats. His reply popped up minutes later, flooded with panic. Chen locked the whole engineering team in a conference room overnight, forcing us to dig through every archived folder. None of the shared files have the key sequences to bypass the data locks. Every attempt to alter core tables triggers a permanent log that flags the breach to client safety dashboards. We've gotten 3 formal client warning emails today alone. He's threatening to fire half the junior team if the system isn't restored by tomorrow morning. I typed a measured response back to him, outlining the 2 clear choices he had ahead. You can keep covering for Chen's mismanagement and risk having your own career tied to a sinking company, or compile every failed troubleshooting log the team's generated over the past 3 days as evidence of his reckless underinvestment in cross-team knowledge sharing. Those records will hold major weight if formal investor audits kick off in the coming week. I hit send, then locked my phone and headed back up the elevator to my apartment. Chen's visit had confirmed he had no real leverage, only hollow threats and transactional offers meant to buy my compliance, without taking any accountability for his cruelty. But I knew he wouldn't stop there. A man that's obsessed with protecting his self-made, genius CEO, public image would dig up every possible underhanded trick to pressure me into capitulating. That evening, my phone blew up with a flood of unfamiliar incoming calls and unread voice notes. Chen's wife, his elderly parents, even distant family friends he tracked down all took turns dialing my number, each one reciting the identical script he'd fed them. Every call leaned on heavy-handed moral grandstanding. You can't ruin a young entrepreneur's life over a minor argument. Show some mercy for all the innocent staff who'll lose their jobs. A 45-year-old woman shouldn't hold grudges this long. I declined every call without listening to the full voice messages, sending a mass auto-reply text to all unknown numbers. All matters related to Novatech are handled via my legal representative. Please refrain from contacting me directly, or I will pursue harassment filings with local authorities. Once the flood of calls died down, I opened a local tech news website to scan the latest industry coverage, and a breaking headline stopped me cold. Novatech stock valuation had crashed nearly 30% in 72 hours, billions in market value erased overnight. The comment sections were already flooded with anonymous former employees spilling details about Chen's obsession with cutting senior headcounts to inflate quarterly profit numbers, paired with screenshots of the group chat mocking me as dead weight. Chen's carefully curated media persona was already crumbling to pieces, and that panic would push him to far more dangerous tactics than loitering outside my apartment building. I pulled out my encrypted USB drive again, spreading the printed pages of my personal algorithm development timelines across the coffee table, each file timestamped years before Star Project had even been greenlit by the board. If he tried to claim the core AI framework as his own patented invention, every timestamped draft would annihilate that lie in front of patent office investigators and institutional investors alike. Hours later, Zhang sent another long, distraught message with attached screenshots of internal company meeting transcripts. Chun had held an emergency all-hands assembly that afternoon, spinning the entire system collapse as my vengeful, unprovoked sabotage. He painted me as a bitter ex-employee hellbent on destroying the company out of petty resentment, omitting every detail of the layoff insult and years of uncredited labor. Half the staff seemed to buy his one-sided narrative, while a smaller group of senior engineers quietly questioned how a single departing worker could take the entire flagship platform offline if proper cross-department training protocols had ever been put in place. I stared at the transcripts for a long stretch, processing the wave of quiet disappointment washing over me. I'd spent 15 years mentoring most of that engineering team, sacrificing weekends to walk them through complex data models, covering their avoidable mistakes during client audits. Yet most of them sat silent during the assembly, letting Chin twist the full truth without pushing back. Their silence wasn't malicious outright. It was fear of retaliation, identical to Zhang's hesitation to speak up 3 days prior. But fear didn't erase the fact they'd chosen to prioritize their own job security over basic fairness towards someone who'd repeatedly gone to bat for them. I jotted down a quick mental list of the next moves Chun was guaranteed to make. First, he dumped massive signing bonuses on top-tier freelance data architects from competing firms in a desperate last-ditch attempt to reverse the system damage. Second, he'd reach out to our mutual early-stage investor to set up a neutral third-party mediation meeting, hoping to use the investor's goodwill to corner me into a settlement. Third, if mediation fell apart, he'd weaponize online gossip to drag my personal reputation through the mud in a final bid to shift all blame onto me. Just as I finished mapping out his predictable playbook, a formal meeting request landed in my email inbox, sent directly from the lead investor's corporate assistant. The message stated the investor wanted to host a closed-door, mediated conversation the following afternoon at his private downtown office, with my legal counsel present and full audio-video recording of all discussion permitted. I knew this was Chen's last viable non-public play before he resorted to widespread online character assassination. I typed a short, crisp reply accepting the meeting on my strict conditions: neutral venue, legal representation for both sides, full permanent recording of every word exchanged. As I hit send, my gaze drifted back to the stack of time-stamped algorithm drafts spread across my table, knowing this single mediation session would be where every one of Chen's carefully constructed lies finally unraveled for good. I showed up to the investor's high-rise office 30 minutes ahead of the scheduled meeting time, my lawyer walking beside me, a thick leather portfolio stuffed with printed evidence clutched tight in her grip. The investor, Wang, owned a floor-to-ceiling suite with panoramic city views. He'd funded Novatech's seed round years back, and he'd watched Chen Li's arrogant power plays build up for years without stepping in to mediate until the company's stock tanked by nearly 30%. Wang's core motivation for calling the sit-down wasn't loyalty to Chen. It was protecting billions of institutional capital he'd sunk into the STAR project, desperate to salvage the AI platform before all investment turned to worthless paper. Chen arrived 10 minutes late, suit rumpled, dark unshaven stubble covering his jaw, the confident, polished CEO act completely gone. He dragged his own corporate attorney behind him, eyes locking onto me the second he crossed the threshold, a mix of raw hatred and desperate pleading flickering across his face in quick succession. He'd spent 3 days burning every personal connection to hunt me down, send harassing family members to badger me, and even loiter outside my apartment building. All tactics that failed miserably, so he'd pin his last hope on Wang's authority to force me into a one-sided settlement. The second we all sat around the polished mahogany conference table, Wang opened the dialogue with a soft, placating tone, attempting to defuse tension before the fight blew up. Lin Wan, I know you've carried unfair treatment over these years, and Chen's made terrible missteps handling staffing and internal tech planning. I'm asking you to hear him out. He's ready to offer any compensation you name to get Star Project back online and stop the company's free fall. Chen leaned forward immediately, elbows planted on the table, voice rough and hoarse from 3 nights of sleepless panic. He dropped every fake formal title he'd used for me at work, going for forced, overly familiar softness to manufacture a false sense of old camaraderie. Wang Jie, I was blind and stupid when I called you dead weight during the layoff. I let short-term budget pressures cloud my judgment. I didn't value all the years you poured into this company. Name your terms. Triple your old base salary, 5% company equity, full CTO title permanently, whatever you want. I'll sign the paperwork on the spot. He delivered the offer like it was a groundbreaking, generous gift, fully convinced money and status would make me overlook every wound he'd inflicted. His biggest blind spot was simple. He thought all my anger stemmed from underpaid labor, not the dehumanizing dismissal and theft of my original intellectual property. He never once considered that the core issue wasn't cash. It was that he'd spent years planning to patent my self-developed core algorithm under his own legal name, erasing my authorship entirely from industry records. I sat quiet, letting him ramble through his rehearsed apology speech, every hollow platitude bouncing off me without registering. Once he finished his script, I tilted my head slightly, voice steady and low, no raised volume to feed the performative drama he wanted to create. Before we talk salary or equity, there's one critical detail we need to address first. Chun, remember the internal board meeting 6 months ago? You stood in front of every director and announced you'd file a personal patent for Star Project's foundational AI algorithm, claiming the entire framework was your independent innovation. Chen's body stiffened instantly, pupils glowing wide with shock. He'd assumed I'd never dug up proof of that speech, or that I'd never dare bring it up in front of their primary investor. He stumbled over his words, scrambling to backtrack and twist the narrative before Wang caught onto the truth. That was just loose hypothetical talk during a strategy briefing. All code written during company hours counts as official corporate work product. That patent filing was always meant to go under Novatech's legal entity, not my personal name. Don't twist casual words into something malicious. My lawyer didn't waste a beat, sliding a stack of printed documents across the table to land directly in front of Wang first, then pushing copies toward Chun and his lawyer. The first set of files were timestamped digital development logs from my personal home workstation. Every iteration of the core algorithm dated 2 full years before Nova even drafted Star Project's official project proposal. Line-by-line code drafts, annotated theoretical notes, screenshots of late-night video calls with external academic experts I consulted to refine the model, all created on my personal hardware, outside company clock and hours, long before Chun had a concept for the flagship product he'd later claim as his magnum opus. Next came a clear audio recording, my attorney tapping the tablet screen to play the board meeting speech through the conference room speakers. Chen's smug, arrogant tone echoed through the quiet office, crystal clear for every person in the room to hear. This proprietary AI algorithm is my original creative breakthrough. I'll submit individual patent paperwork under my legal identity to boost my personal industry reputation. The firm can license usage rights from me long-term. Silence crashed over the table the second the audio cut off. Wang's face drained of all its easy neutrality, his gaze hardening as he flipped through the timestamp code logs 1 page at a time, absorbing the irrefutable timeline proving Chun had zero hand in the foundational development work. Chen's attorney leaned in to whisper rushed damage control into his ear, but Chen ignored him entirely, flying into a defensive rage, pointing a shaking finger straight at me. You recorded private internal meetings without consent. All this evidence is inadmissible. You're manufacturing lies to extort the company for massive payouts. Extort? I repeated the word with a hollow, bitter laugh, leaning back in my leather chair to lay out every unbroken chain of harm he'd inflicted over the years, each point sharp and rooted in tangible fact. 15 years, I built this company's data infrastructure from scratch when it was a 6-person startup. 3 years back, a catastrophic system-wide data breach threatened to tank every client contract. I pulled 4 weeks of consecutive all-nighters, landed in the hospital with acute myocarditis from overwork, and you didn't issue a single performance bonus or public acknowledgement of the recovery effort. Then you labeled me disposable dead weight to slash payroll costs, seized the work I built to pad your personal resume, and planned to steal my original algorithm for a personal patent to inflate your public CEO brand. Now the platform collapses because you refuse to implement cross-team knowledge transfer protocols, and you call me the villain for protecting my own intellectual property. Wang cut in before Chen could scream another retort, his tone sharp with unmasked disappointment after years of funding Chen's venture. I backed you because I thought you possessed both technical vision and basic integrity. This patent scheme alone changes every risk assessment our investment team has on Novatech. You plan to claim a founding engineer's independent work as your own personal invention, all while underpaying and undervaluing her for over a decade. That's not a minor verbal slip. That's deliberate intellectual theft. Chen's shoulders sagged, the fiery anger melting into desperate, pathetic panic. He dropped the aggressive act instantly, hands splaying out on the table in a pleading gesture, eyes glistening with manufactured tears as he directed all his pleas at Wang instead of me, fully aware he'd lost any chance of swaying my opinion. I messed up. I admit every mistake. I'll scrap the personal patent plan entirely, sign paperwork assigning all algorithm rights back to the firm. Just convince Lin Wan to reverse the system blocks. Without Star Project's functionality, every investor's capital evaporates overnight. Hundreds of regular staff lose their livelihoods. I shook my head once. No sympathy for his sudden crisis of conscience. The staff's livelihoods weren't my priority when you let the entire office mock me as an obsolete old lady after I got laid off. They all sat silent while I was dragged through public humiliation, no single person stepping forward to defend the woman who trained every junior engineer on their team. Your desperation right now isn't concern for your employees. It's fear of losing your wealth, your fancy title, and the social clout your CEO position grants you. I laid out 3 non-negotiable terms, speaking slowly so every word landed clearly for Wang and Chen's legal team to absorb without room for misinterpretation. First, a company-wide all-hands assembly where you deliver a formal public apology, admitting your ageist layoff comment and acknowledging every core Star Project technology was developed by me. Second, a legally binding intellectual property transfer contract assigning full ownership of the foundational algorithm to my person, with Nova required to pay standard market licensing fees to continue utilizing the AI framework long-term. Third, I will dispatch a small team of my own trusted engineers to guide Nova staff through system restoration over a 2-week window. Under no circumstances will I re-sign an employment contract to work directly for this firm again. Chen's face turned a mottled mix of red and gray, every ounce of his ego screaming against the terms I'd set. Publicly confessing he'd stolen my work and discriminated against senior staff would destroy the young genius CEO, brand he'd spent his entire career curating. Handing over full algorithm ownership stripped him of the single flashy product he'd used to woo investors for years. He tried to bargain, throwing out partial compromises to chip away at my demands, offering a smaller licensing rate and a private apology behind closed doors instead of a company-wide address. My lawyer shut down every attempt to negotiate before Chen could finish a sentence, sliding a drafted legal addendum across the table listing consequences for failing to comply within 3 full business days. If these 3 binding conditions are not fully executed by the deadline, we will submit all code evidence, meeting recordings, and proof of Chen's IP theft to every industry regulatory body, patent office, and active Nova investor group simultaneously. We'll also file formal civil claims for intellectual infringement and workplace age discrimination, seeking substantial financial damages on top of permanent injunctive relief blocking Nova's use of the STAR algorithm entirely. Chen stared at the printed addendum, hands trembling as he processed the permanent professional ruin waiting for him if he refused to concede. He'd entered the mediation room fully convinced he held all the leverage with cash and job offers, only to discover every secret scheme he'd hidden had been documented, time-stamped, and preserved by me long before he ever moved to fire me. Wang sat silent beside him, no longer willing to interject with soft mediation speeches. He'd seen the full proof of Chen's dishonesty, and his loyalty to his investment portfolio outweighed any desire to defend the flawed CEO. Chen's attorney leaned in again, quietly advising him to accept the terms to avoid multi-million-dollar lawsuits and regulatory penalties that would sink the company irreparably. Chen sat frozen for nearly 10 minutes, locked in silent internal conflict. His core struggle was twofold. His burning pride refused to let him stand in front of all his employees and admit he lied about inventing the flagship AI product. Yet the alternative, total corporate collapse, criminal IP investigations, permanent industry blacklisting, was far more terrifying to his self-serving priorities. He finally lifted his head, gaze hollow and defeated, addressing Wang instead of me to avoid direct eye contact. I'll agree to all 3 of her conditions. Give me 3 days to coordinate the all-hands meeting and draft the IP transfer paperwork with legal. I didn't respond to his surrender with any triumphant reaction, just nodded once to my lawyer to note his verbal acknowledgement on the official meeting record. We wrapped the discussion shortly after, Wang pulling me aside privately as Chen and his legal team lingered at the table to review the drafted settlement terms. I'd like to extend a formal investment offer for your own independent tech startup once you regain full algorithm ownership. Your technical expertise and attention to legal risk control are exactly what this industry lacks right now. I thanked him for the offer without committing on the spot, knowing launching my own firm was already locked into my long-term plan. But his proposal added another layer of pressure weighing on Chen's shoulders. He wasn't just losing his core product's IP. He was creating a direct industry competitor funded by his primary investor. I walked out of the investor's office tower into bright afternoon sunlight, my lawyer beside me packing all the evidence files back into her portfolio. My phone buzzed with a new text from Zhang Yuan, his message short and fraught with anxiety. The whole engineering team heard the mediation meeting was a disaster. Words spreading you hold full rights to the Star Core code. Chen locked himself in his office, screaming for hours. Won't speak to any of us about the settlement terms. 3 days from now, he's forced to stand in front of every single employee and confess every lie he's told for years. I glanced up at Novatech's glass skyscraper visible a few blocks down the road, knowing a public apology assembly would be the moment every illusion of Chen's perfect entrepreneurial persona shattered completely in front of the entire company. 3 days passed in a blur of back and forth legal revisions. Chen's legal team dragged their feet on drafting the IP transfer paperwork at every turn, trying to slip sneaky loopholes into clauses that would let Nova retain partial usage rights without paying full licensing fees. Every altered draft landed in my lawyer's inbox, and each time we sent it back marked with red corrections, stripping out every hidden loophole they'd attempted to bury in fine print. Chen's core motive here was still clinging to a last-ditch escape route. He hoped I'd grow tired of the back and forth and accept a flawed agreement that left him with leverage to fight me later. He vastly underestimated how thoroughly I'd mapped every legal angle of my independent algorithm years earlier. The morning of the mandatory all-hands company assembly arrived, I didn't step foot inside Nova's glass office tower alone. My attorney walked beside me, carrying bound original copies of every signed settlement document, fully notarized IP ownership transfers, and the stack of timestamp code drafts that had dismantled Chen's lies during mediation. Investor Wang also accompanied us, having made it clear he planned to sit front row as a neutral witness to Chen's public apology. The entire staff filed into the huge open auditorium one group at a time. I watched their faces shift the second they spotted me near the stage. Some engineers' eyes widened with quiet guilt, remembering the group chat mockery they participated in weeks prior. Others stared down at their shoes, unable to meet my gaze, fully aware they'd stood silent while their founding core engineer was discarded and slandered. Chen stepped onto the stage first, shoulders hunched, no fancy tailored suit or polished media-ready smile this time. He'd foregone his usual flashy presentation slides, the massive projection screen behind him blink save for a plain white background. His voice cracked the second the microphone hummed to life, no trace of the arrogant bravado he carried in every prior company speech. I need to make a full, unreserved apology to Lin Wan, in front of every member of Novatech. He paused, swallowing hard, eyes darting across hundreds of waiting faces. When I laid her off 3 weeks ago, I labeled her dead weight in a private meeting with HR. That comment was rooted in unfair age bias, completely undeserved after 15 years of her building this company's foundational data systems from scratch. I dismissed her tireless labor, took credit for the Star Project AI algorithm she independently created during her off-hours work, and attempted to file a personal patent under my own name to inflate my public professional reputation. All of these actions were unethical, dishonest, and legally actionable. A murmur rippled through the auditorium instantly. Every junior engineer and department lead exchanged shocked glances. For years, Chun had paraded Star Project as his sole personal innovation at investor galas and industry conferences, and none of the staff had suspected the truth behind the code's origins. Chun kept speaking, laying out every misstep without softening the blow of his own failures. I refused to implement cross-team knowledge transfer training for years, ignoring Lin's repeated formal budget requests to document core workflows. That reckless choice left our flagship platform entirely dependent on her unique expertise. When I terminated her employment without negotiating a knowledge handoff window, the automated safety locks she coded as disaster prevention protocols triggered, crashing Star Project and wiping billions off our market valuation. I sent family members, distant acquaintances, and even attempted to ambush Lin at her private residence to bully her into fixing the system without accountability for my mistakes. I also permitted workplace harassment against her in internal group chats, never intervening to shut down cruel mockery from our own staff. He fell silent for a beat, staring directly at me where I stood beside Wang in the front row. All intellectual property tied to Star Project's core algorithm legally belongs solely to Lin Wan, effective today. Novatech must pay standard market licensing fees to continue operating the AI platform moving forward. I take full personal responsibility for every poor managerial decision and act of dishonesty that led to this company's current crisis. Once his apology wrapped, the auditorium erupted in quiet, tense chatter. Several of the engineers I'd personally mentored stood up halfway through the speech and slipped out the back exit, overcome with shame for their earlier silence and mockery. Chen stepped off the stage, head bowed, and didn't linger to field questions from the crowd. He fled straight to his executive office, knowing the full weight of his broken public image would crush him the second the assembly dispersed. After the speech concluded, Wang pulled me aside in the lobby, laying out his finalized investment offer for my independent tech firm. My fund will inject full seed capital to launch your AI analytics startup. We'll lease office space directly across from Nova's tower, give you complete creative and operational control, zero outside interference on your technical roadmap. He slid a formal term sheet into my hand, the valuation figures printed bold across the header, far beyond what I'd initially planned for my startup launch budget. I reviewed the paperwork quickly, then gave my verbal acceptance. My My motive for launching my own company wasn't petty revenge against Chen. It was reclaim the value of 15 years of uncredited labor, create a workplace culture that respected senior technical staff and rewarded genuine expertise over flashy self-promotion, and build a more stable, transparent iteration of the STAR AI framework without the reckless mismanagement Chen had enforced at Nova. That afternoon, I returned to Nova one final time to walk the engineering floor and walk the team through 2 weeks of guided system restoration training as agreed in the settlement terms. The junior devs hung on every word I said, scribbling pages of detailed notes for the first time in the company's history, desperate to absorb the core knowledge Chen had refused to fund formal training for all those years. Zhang Yuan pulled me aside once the group session broke for lunch, his voice shaky with unspoken remorse. "I'm so sorry I didn't speak up for you back when everyone mocked you in the group chat. I was terrified Chen would blacklist me from the entire industry, but I know that's no excuse for staying silent." I didn't snap at him or dismiss his apology outright. I recognized his fear, having watched Chen weaponize career threats against staff countless times before. Your regret means something now that you're choosing to take action to fix the damage. If you want to make amends, gather all documented records of Chen's mismanaged budgets, falsified procurement costs, and unauthorized personal spending from company accounts. Those will be critical evidence for the board's upcoming removal vote. Zhang nodded hard, committing to compile every internal financial log he had access to over the next 48 hours. His shift in loyalty wasn't random. Watching Chen's humiliating public confession and realizing the CEO's greed had sunk the entire company had stripped away the blind loyalty he'd clung to for years. 2 days later, Zhang delivered a full encrypted folder of internal financial evidence to my lawyer's secure inbox. The files contained detailed receipts, hidden vendor contracts, and bank transfer records proving Chen had siphoned corporate funds into personal real estate investments, falsified project material costs to pocket excess cash, and set up shell suppliers to funnel Nova's revenue straight into his own private accounts. The evidence crossed far beyond workplace discrimination and IP theft. It constituted clear criminal fraud and embezzlement. My attorney forwarded the complete dossier to Nova's board of directors and local commercial regulatory authorities the same day. The board called an emergency closed-door extraordinary board meeting less than 24 hours after receiving the financial evidence. All board members voted unanimously to remove Chun-Li from his CEO position immediately, freezing his corporate access and launching a full forensic audit of all company finances dating back 5 years. Regulatory officials arrived at Nova's headquarters the following morning to seize financial servers and interview accounting staff on site. News of the executive fraud scandal leaked to major financial media outlets within hours, triggering a second massive stock crash that erased nearly half of Nova's remaining market capitalization. Chun had nowhere left to run. Every lever he tried to pull over the past 3 weeks, bribery, threats, harassment, fake legal claims, emotional manipulation, had backfired catastrophically one after another. His core flaw had always been blind, unearned arrogance. He'd assumed his family's company wealth and overseas education background made him untouchable, blind to the fact that his entire business rested on technical work he'd stolen and mismanaged. I focused fully on launching my new startup, officially naming it Teaming Technology, Dantech. Zhang handed in his resignation from Nova within 48 hours of the board's CEO removal vote, bringing 3 other reliable senior engineers from the original core team to join my founding staff as co-partners. We leased a bright, open office space directly across the street from Nova's skyscraper, moving in and setting up workstations within a week. The 88 million yuan severance I'd received from Nova's layoff package went straight into purchasing new server hardware and drafting our upgraded AI framework's initial development blueprints. Our reimagined analytics platform, Dawn 1.0, fixed every reckless structural flaw Chen had forced me to band-aid on the original STAR project. We built full cross-team knowledge documentation into every module by design, scheduled mandatory quarterly skill-sharing workshops, and implemented transparent salary grading that rewarded technical tenure instead of flashy self-marketing. Clients who'd relied on Nova's AI tools began reaching out to us within days of our launch, nervous about Nova's ongoing regulatory crisis and eager to switch to a stable, ethically managed alternative. A week after Teaming Technology opened its official office doors, local criminal investigation police contacted my legal team to request a formal witness statement regarding Chen's corporate embezzlement evidence. The authorities confirmed the financial records Zhang had submitted contained sufficient proof to file formal criminal charges against Chen for large-scale misappropriation of company assets. If convicted, he faced multi-year prison sentences alongside full financial restitution of all stolen corporate funds. I sat at my new office floor-to-ceiling window, staring across the road at Nova's dark, half-empty office floors. Their signage still hung tall over the building entrance, but the once bustling parking lot sat half vacant, dozens of former staff having already handed in their resignations to interview with teaming or competing tech firms. My phone buzzed with a media interview request from a top national business magazine, asking to feature my turnaround story as a cover piece focused on age discrimination and workplace intellectual property justice. I typed a short confirmation reply to the magazine's editorial team, already mapping out how I'd frame the narrative, not as a petty revenge arc against a spoiled young CEO, but as proof that technical expertise and consistent hard work always outweigh empty flashy charisma and exploitative management. At 45, the world had written me off as disposable dead weight. Now I stood at the helm of a fast-growing tech startup backed by major institutional investment, holding full ownership of the AI framework I'd built with 15 years of sleepless nights and sacrificed holidays. The game Chen started by tossing me aside had fully flipped. He'd lost everything he'd spent his life chasing, while I'd built a brand new future from the pieces he'd discarded.